I am very excited for today.
Because today is the day that we're gonna try on Medieval Knight's armor for the first time in our lives.
However, this wouldn't be interesting enough if we're only going to suit up. That is why, once we are covered up to our teeth with steel, we are going to perform a few tasks in order to find out how all this armor impacts our mobility. I don't know about you guys, but when I was little, primary school age or so, I was exposed to this prejudice saying that medieval steel plate armor made knights practically fully immobile. As I grew and learned about history and melee fighting, this superstition became less and less believable, up to the point where I realized that it must be somewhat or rather entirely untrue. But probably most of you would be surprised how many people still believe this shit. I think it is enough to say that most folks, when they see us in Roman armor, actually call us knights.
Last time I saw him, I was inside your mama. Oh, look guys, that's a knight!
With this level of knowledge amongst most of the population, it is not surprising that folks are repeating things like
Plate armor was so heavy that the knight needed a crane to get up on his horse.
or
Once a knight fell off his horse, he could not stand up on his own. His armor was so heavy.
And guys, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to offend anybody here. Maybe except for the educational system. On the contrary, with this video, we hope to reach as many people as possible and once and for all flush away the medieval knight mobility superstition. But every superstition has a little grain of truth to it. Let's see how big it is in this case.
And here is the armor that we're going to be testing today. Although first, these shoulder pieces need a quick clean. Thank God we live in the 21st century. All better now. Let's put it all on. With that, I would like to thank Konrad from Armor Workshop Armories and his reenactment group Chorągiew Ziemi Międzyrzeckiej for lending us their gear and helping with filming. You can find links to both workshop and group in this video's description. The armor that you see me put on can be dated to around the late 14th and early 15th century Western Europe, thus being perfect for mobility testing, because this is the time when plate armor got to its almost the most heavy form. However, it might not look to be so in my case, as the set I borrowed is from a smaller dude than me. As a result, I ended up looking like I ate a Super Mario mushroom and my outfit forgot to grow with me. Looking a little funny, but still epic. It would be good if I had an extra plate to cover my abdominal area better and larger shoulder pieces. On the other hand, Kacper rolled out a 20 and got a much better fit. Regardless of all that, the armor, by weighing over 20 kilograms in total and covering all the strategic places from a mobility test perspective, will do just fine. Since we are not yet finished with dressing me up in armor, let me tell you this. Plate knight armor feels incredible. With us being used to oversized woolen Roman tunics, it was great to feel the delicate touch of linen and a comfort that comes from a well-sewn clothing. Thanks to this, when steel came on top, you could say it had a second skin feel, with, in this case, the skin being made of metal. The only issue is that it is a quite complicated armor set to put on. It would take me hours to figure it out and put it all on by myself. Thankfully, there was Konrad to help me. Historical knights also had helpers in form of squires. After all, knights were noblemen and were at all times accompanied by helpers. Finally, we got it all. Once in armor, we began with a few basic exercises to check how much our mobility worsened in each joint. Shoulders came first, and here we had no problem with putting our hands up in the air. We had easily around 90% of our non-armored mobility still available. This shouldn't be surprising, as the weapons that were used by knights most often were designed for a slashing motion. That includes overhead swings. In case of rotatory motion in a shoulder joint, I can't say that it worsened to any significant level. Torso was the most impaired part of the body. With a cuirass not being in any way foldable, it quite significantly restricted a deep bend and side leaning. Still, the remaining available mobility was satisfying, and far from what some history laymen could assume. Legs is what we tested next. The basic warm-up kind of movement was very promising. No restriction whatsoever when it comes to bringing legs up to the torso and moving them to the sides. However, my Slavic soul was broken when it came to squatting. We got to make a fairly deep squat, but it still lacked a bit of range to be granted the rank of a Slav squat.
But we do not grant you the rank of
Slav squat.
What?
Fortunately, lunges sweetened the mood, as here we felt no restrictions at all. Full range of motion available. It wouldn't be a proper mobility test without push-ups. Just like with lunges, we had no trouble at all to reach a full range of motion in a push-up. Turns out, knight armor was so well designed that it did not, to any degree, restrict the most natural movement for joints. With push-ups unlocked, I also had to go for a burpee, which then encouraged us to do something even crazier. That would be a somersault. First attempt for both of us were kinda scary, and thus the exercise did not look great, especially in my case. However, we did much better on a second try. With basic mobility covered, we wanted to see how the armor would do in a more realistic scenario. Let's say that of a siege. Sieges at times required the fighters to climb many different things. Since we lack a castle, climbing this pallet stack will have to do. First try is always the hardest. Luckily, it didn't take us too long to figure out the climb. Climbing this pallet stack was fairly simple. There were moments of instability, however, in the end, we had enough mobility for this task to be honestly quite easy to perform. It was similar in case of a ladder climb. By the way, also a very useful skill when it comes to besieging a castle or a walled town. Once we realized how easy we can climb a ladder in knight's armor, we decided to film this humiliating bit just for your entertainment.
Climb the walls! Kill them French bastards! Climb the walls!
There is one more semi-realistic scenario we wanted to test. That is a camp scenario. As previously mentioned, knights were accompanied by squires who would do any of the wood chopping and food preparation. Also, any sane person would take off a helmet and gloves for these kinds of tasks. But for the sake of mobility test training, we kept it on. In the end, helmets turned out to be bad for chopping wood as they obstructed vision, making us miss a few first axe swings. However, mobility-wise, we were golden. Moreover, we were surprised how relatively easy fruit peeling turned out to be in plated gloves. This only shows that even finger mobility was not overlooked by medieval armorers. To be honest, the gym scenario was not planned, but since our host of that day had a decent amount of gym equipment, we are also able to show you that you can do legit strength training in medieval armor. Push-ups, deadlifts, military press, bicep curls, ab wheel and more. You can do it all. And at the same time, not fear death coming from a random greatsword. Let us conclude. Wait. How can you conclude and not show any fighting? Fair point. I shall conclude then with the footage of us boxing each other in armor, playing in the background. I hope we proved today that the medieval plate was not as restricted as most people believe it to be. On the contrary, mobility was likely one of the most important aspects when designing and constructing armor. If by any chance someone still finds it hard to believe, then you gotta check out the Quitum channel, where our friend is doing a much better job with fighting in plate armor. What is more, his armor is also much better suited. That would be all for today. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more content like this, and regardless of today's medieval theme, do remember, Roma caput mundi. Still here? Oh yeah, Rome is a more everyday theme here, so if you're also into that, here you can watch our analysis of Roman legionary fighting, or here you can watch whatever the glorious algorithm gives you. Bye!